Hello, everyone. We have a very special episode of the Rowperfect Rowing Chat for you in this month's installment. So we'll be kind of switching things around, and I will be your guest host. My name is Joe DeLeo. I'm also one of the members of the Strength Coach Roundtable alongside Will Ruth. And this month, I will be interviewing one of the co-founders of Rowperfect, Rebecca Caroe. Rebecca, welcome to the show. This is a real treat for both of us, so it'll be fun sitting across from you and having the opportunity to interview you.
Yeah, I must say, when I first had the idea, I wasn't sure about it. And then I thought, no, actually, this is a really good idea.
Yes, we are going to have a lot of fun. We've had some fantastic conversations over the last couple of years, so I'm excited to have the opportunity to speak with you a little bit more and get to know you and be the one to kind of share your background and story with the audience. So I think with that, why don't we kind of kick things off, and why don't you tell them a little bit more about yourself and your journey into the sport of rowing?
Well, I was the kid at school who tried really hard at every sport, and my school was a kind of ball sports school. And although I tried hard, I really never made the top team. I was the goalie. Ball sports and me don't really mix. And so when I got to university, in the first week, they have all the clubs and societies have recruitment parties with coloured cocktails, right? Recall. And the rowing club in my college, Pembroke College, Cambridge, said, you know, come to the party. So I came to the party, and I remember the then captain, who was a coxswain, and obviously I was quite a bit taller than him, and he looked me up and he looked me down and he said, "You're tall, you should try rowing." And I thought, oh, okay, why not? So Mark Jacobs was the guy who recruited me. Kevin Bowles was my first coach. Kevin was the boatman coach at Pembroke, really successful lightweight in his own day. He's probably only a couple of years older than me, but obviously he was the authority figure. And he taught us really well from the beginning and made me appreciate now how good that early instruction was. And we were the very first girls going into a previously male-only college. So they had no boats that were the right size for us. They had never put out a women's crew in any events. So it was all a plain sheet of paper, as it were. And we, had a bunch of fun, of course, but we also got quite good quite fast because the men were very good. They were ahead of the river at the time, which means that they led the summer racing. And so we had excellent instruction, which also helped. And by the time I was in my third year, I had rowed for the university in the Oxford-Cambridge boat race in the B crew called Blondie. I had been the captain of the women's squad, and we had won our blades in the university summer bumping races in a total of 75 strokes. That's over 4 days. We were so much faster than the crews around us that we would like do a racing start and we would like hit them, the crew in front. So that was my entry into the world of rowing.
Wow. Yes, some very impressive accomplishments, and clearly making some very quick strides in the sport. And that's actually very cool to hear that you were, it sounds like, part of the inaugural team at your university. Yeah.
Yeah, and some of those people are still my friends today, which is really nice. I don't think many of them are still rowing, but we all have very fond memories of our time there. And I've been privileged to be invited back to coach. And for a while, I lived in Cambridge until just before I moved here to New Zealand. And so I would coach quite regularly. And they were kind enough to name a boat after me, which at the time, all I could think of was, I thought they only named boats after dead people.
Oh, well, that's a very nice honor to have a rowing shell named after you. So congratulations. So let's talk a little bit more. So you had the experience at university. That was kind of your introduction, how you got started in the sport. Now, did you continue rowing all the way through your life up until present day, or were there some breaks in between? How did that go? Kind of let's try to take us up to present day and round out the rest of your rowing experience.
Well, I stopped rowing the minute I left university. I went to live in London. I got a job. And then I had a boyfriend at the time who accused me one day of being fat and unfit, which was probably accurate. And I just remember thinking to myself, oh, blooming show you. I'll go and join a rowing club. And I didn't tell him. I wrote to the 2 rowing clubs that I had heard of in London. One is Thames Rowing Club and the other was Thames Tradesmen's Rowing Club. And I went down and tried out at one of them, and it was pre-season and there was like no one there, and I turned up and there was no boats were going on the water, and I was a bit disappointed. And then I went to the other one and met a very enthusiastic lady called Lizzie Chapman, who was the captain at the time. And she just said, oh, you'll know so-and-so and you'll know this person. And she pretty much signed me up on the spot, and I rejoined the sport at Thames Tradesmen's Rowing Club, coached by James McLean, again in a squad of great people, and mostly doing sweep rowing at that time. I'd never been in a sculling boat. And we again had a pretty good ride for 5 years.
Fantastic. So what was like that transition going from, did you row primarily sweep at university and then you got into sculling later in life? That's what I thought. Okay. So what was that kind of transition like, going from sort of the bigger boats, so to speak, into the smaller ones?
Oh, it took some years. The main difference and challenge was that in those 5 years, the sport technically had changed. So we rowed in carbon fiber boats at university, but we used wooden oars. So carbon fiber oars had come out, although they were Macons, I think. Were they hatches? I can't remember. But the main thing that had changed was that I was taught to row with a C-shaped back and to reach forward and have a long forward reach to get a long stroke. And by the time I came back 5 years later, it was straight back and a rock over from the hips. And to this day, you watch me when I get tired, I go down and down and down and my back curves. And it's that was the biggest change for me, was that the technique appeared to be completely different.
That's very interesting to hear, kind of hear that reflection, looking back at how the technique was taught and coached to you, kind of, especially in different places too, as the sport's progressed over the last several years. So you kind of noticed one big challenge there. Are there other ones that come to mind that are really important, you think, for athletes to address in the sport of rowing?
Not really. I think the biggest challenge for the whole sport is to have the best coach should teach the beginners, because that robust base that I got was 90% absolutely right to what we teach today.
Right. And
I didn't have a ton of things that I had to unlearn.
So having that foundation in place with a very good technical coach, especially if you're a youth athlete, a junior, making sure that you're really getting some good development at a young age.
Totally. Anyone at a beginner, it doesn't matter when you begin, whether you're a master or whatever, you just should have a very good technical coach and be taught a lot of the real basics. I get very frustrated now when I'm teaching people who, when you say, hey, the boat's tipped down to bow side, and you go, well, what affects the balance of the boat? How do you get the boat back to level? And they simply don't understand that the oars are equal and opposite. And they're like, oh, push your hands down lower. And you're like, no, that's going to tip the boat down to bow side even more.
Right, right. So what are some characteristics that people should pay attention to when looking for a good coach or a good technical coach if they're just getting ready to start rowing?
The first thing is look at crews that person has coached. Are the blades parallel? Does it look like everyone's doing the same thing? Even if you're not experienced, you can tell if it looks like they're disciplined and orderly and like they all appear to be doing the same thing at the same time. Then the second thing is look at if you want to race to win, look at their racing record. Does this club or coach regularly enter regattas and get into the final? You know, it really isn't any more difficult than that, because when you're not skilled or experienced in the sport, you don't have much else to go on. And I think just looking at the raw basics like that, do they look like they know what they're doing? And if you want to be in a racing crew, does it look like his existing and past crews have won races?
Right.
Of course.
That's some very good. Go ahead.
The thing that pisses me off big time is when you see a retiring international athlete get a top coaching position, often at a university, as a coach. And you're like, this person has zero coaching experience. What on earth makes you think, you know, a really famous international athlete has any competence in teaching? They have high competence in being an athlete and racing successfully. And I think that that is a delusion that a lot of clubs have. They hire for your athletic record, not for your teaching record.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. The teaching and be a very successful high level athlete are not the same thing. And that's not to take away from anybody that has gotten a high level coaching position, but teaching is and coaching is there's so much that goes into it. You have the physiological, the technical, the rigging, psychology. There are so many variables that go into high performance, that you are responsible for as the coach, and that you may not necessarily be very cognizant of as an athlete. So the amount of things that you need to kind of have in your toolbox and develop wisdom around are exponential.
And there's a definite skill in understanding how to partake information and have the other party take it in as knowledge, and how to show and demonstrate things and explain things in a way that other people can understand. And when I'm coaching coxswains or people who are sitting in the bow seat and doing the calls for a coxless boat, I will often say to them, look, until you are an established crew that know each other really well, you need to explain how you want someone to make the change. It's down on bow side. How are you going to bring it back to level so that everyone is doing the same thing at the same time?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So let's kind of shift gears a little bit to one of our next topics, questions that we had, which was, have you ever had a perfect race?
Now that's almost. I've had a couple of really, really, really good races. There was one at Henley Royal Regatta. I was in an 8 for Tideway Scullers School, who was one of my later clubs, where I learned to scull, as you probably guessed. And we were in the women's 8s event. It was an Olympic year, so there were no international overseas crews racing. And in the first round, our club crew got drawn against a crew which had been selected to go to the Commonwealth Games, the Commonwealth Regatta, representing England. And there was, I think, a couple of people who maybe had been in our club the previous year. So, it was a good crew. And we beat them in the first round. Most of the people in the boat had a peak experience, an almost out of body feeling, like they couldn't tell how hard they were working, and that the boat just seemed to effortlessly go past the other crew. And we beat them by 2/3 of a length. And it was partly, I think, the peaking performance training we had done in the 7 days prior. Partly we had nothing to lose. these girls were supposed to be better than us. They were rowing for England. We were just a club crew, and they could not believe we'd beaten them. And so that was a really amazingly, unexpectedly amazing race. And there was a girl in the boat with me, Kate Groves, who's a good friend. She and I were bow pair. We were the old people in the bows. And she had been to 2 Olympic Games, rowed for Great Britain. And she told me after that race, she had never, ever experienced a peak experience like that ever before in her racing career, which was very interesting. So that was pretty much, yeah, I'd say that was a perfect race. And then funny enough, I had one this past 3 months ago. The World Masters Games event was here in Auckland, New Zealand, and I was competing in a women's Cox's 4. Me and another girl from my club and 2 women from a club that's in the South Island of New Zealand. So we didn't have much time to practice together. And I was in the bow seat doing the calls. And we are old in our age category. We were like 6 months short of being in an older age category. So we're racing people who are up to 7 years younger than us. Anyway, we knew that there was an Australian crew in the lane next to us wearing orange who were pretty good. We'd seen them in the heat. We knew there was a New Zealand crew made up of former internationals from Cambridge Rowing Club here. So, you know, they were big names. And so we're lining up for the final. And I like to think I'm quite good at judging races. Actually, a lot of that I learned from Kate Groves. She's extremely good at spotting the moment in the race where if you can do something, you can change the result, change the outcome. And I made a decision to start our finishing sprint earlier than usual. We were sitting just in 4th place. Someone videoed it, so we were able to see it afterwards. And I called us into our finishing sprint sequence. And we came up on the orange girls next to us. And they then obviously became quite quickly aware that we were pretty level with them and going through them. So obviously they pushed back. And it really was an all-out race. Them against us, totally focused. I can't forget which lanes we were, like lanes 2 and 3, to the extent that we overtook the New Zealand former internationals from Cambridge. We won, the orange girls were 2nd, and the internationals ended up in 3rd because they hadn't spotted there was a private battle going on. And afterwards, so many people said, that was the most exciting race of the day. We couldn't believe you did what you did. And again, I didn't think about it. It was only instinct that told me when to call that finishing sprint. And we called it and we won by a reasonably small margin. So yeah, I'd say that was a pretty perfect race.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's that instinct is only honed and developed after so many years of experience. So that's pretty cool to hear. You coming out on the top at the other side of that battle there, going down the race course.
Yeah, getting it wrong is what teaches you how to get it right.
Absolutely, absolutely. So look, we're going to shift gears again, but this time we're going to talk about the company that you have started, Rowperfect. So with that, what was the kind of impetus to launch Rowperfect? You know, how did you come up with the idea, and why did you want to pursue this endeavor?
It fell into our lap. I never had any plans to be an entrepreneur. When I met my husband, Grant Craze, at Marlow Rowing Club when I moved out of London after I'd been at Thames Tradesman, and he was our coach. And yep, I married my coach. But hey, that's how his mom met his dad as well. And after 5 years there, he got a job back in London coaching at a high school called King's College School, Wimbledon. And the job came with a very nice apartment, the boathouse flat, above the boathouse on the Putney embankment, lovely views. And it was a really happy time for us. We lived over the shop. And while we were there, part of the deal was the second bedroom in the flat was available for the use of another coach. And this other coach was a guy called Harry Mahon, who was an international, really famous New Zealand coach. And he didn't actually live there all the time. Most of the time he lived with his girlfriend near Oxford, and he would just come and stay over whenever he wanted. He also would lend the room to any of his friends from New Zealand who were visiting London. So we got to meet a ton of really interesting people. He would just like, you'd come home and on the answer phone, there'd be, oh yeah, hi, it's Harry here. Oh, friend of mine, John Parker, he's showing up Thursday. I've told him you'll give him a key, you know, and he often wasn't there himself. Anyway, so Harry was our flatmate, and Grant's boss and Harry's good friend and former athlete, Tony Brooke, he and Harry had started importing the Rowperfect rowing machine from Caspar Rieckers, the Dutchman who invented them, because Harry saw the machine at a world championships and said, this is a tool I can use to teach athletes to move the way I want them to move. And Harry was a really technical coach. It was all about moving with the boat and taking advantage of how the boat moved to make the boat move fast. And the sliding flywheel, as well as the sliding seat, is part of acquiring that skill. So Harry was hugely enthusiastic, and he basically, every crew he coached, he said to their club, you must buy these machines. So he and Tony imported them. And that was the start of the business in, I think, around 1998. Harry got sick with liver cancer and died in 2001. And Tony asked Grant if he would come and help him out. And so Grant initially would just like, if anyone visited and wanted to try out the machine, his job was just like to show them how to use it. And then later on, I gave them some advice on like following up on inquiries. Like people would inquire, and then I say, well, why don't we call them up and go, hey Joe, you inquired, we gave you a price, you're going to buy. And quite a lot of them would buy because you followed up, because I'm in marketing, so I understand a little bit about sales. Marvelous, which was very nice. And so informally I joined in with them, and then he formally said, would you like to join the company? And then a couple of years after that, Tony made a decision to change his career path and get out of being a rowing coach, which he did, and he sold the company to Grant and myself.
Wow. That's incredible. So building off of that, now we kind of have the foundation, the roots of Rowperfect. And one of the key central pillars of the company has been education. So why is that, and why is education so important?
I think it goes back to that frustration I talked earlier about people being poorly taught. Rowperfect started as a mail order company, and we got a website pretty early on, I think around 2003. And then we quite quickly, after we had the company on our own without Tony and Harry, got approached by a couple of other businesses saying, would you represent our business in the UK? And the first one was Coxmate, the rowing electronics company. Then the second one was Durham Boat, Jim and Colleen Dreyer, who wanted representation for their oars, the Dreyer oars. And then the Magic Oarlock came along from Australia. And again, so suddenly from being a one product company, we then had a whole suite of different rowing products. And we started selling those. And then having a website just became easier then to display and explain about them, because nearly all of those products had features that required explanation. And that gave me the kernel of the idea about education. How can you tell if one oar is better or different than another oar? How can you tell if a magic oarlock is different from a conventional oarlock? And I find explaining things, I do a lot of it for my job, so it comes reasonably easy to me. Anyway, that was the sort of through the early sort of 90s, 2000s. By 2007, just before Christmas, we opened an e-commerce store. I remember the excitement of the very first order that came through. But even before then, we had started newsletters as a way of staying in touch and capturing people's email addresses as a way of staying in touch. And as a result of that, it became very easy to start blogging. And so 2006, 2007, we were blogging on the Rowperfect platform. And I was blogging on my own platform, which actually is called Creative Agency Secrets, which is now the name of my business. And I began to understand how blogs worked, how people started conversations, and asking questions is a great way to start a conversation. And so doing that for rowing was really easy, because although there are rowing technique books, rowing's like riding a bicycle. Until you've tried it for yourself, you actually can't learn how to do it from a book. And that interposing of the technical written plus the experience is where I see Rowperfect sits. So we had a few, I think they call them speed bumps in entrepreneur speak, where little hiccups happened, products got withdrawn, we no longer represented Drea, Casper Riekers died. So the Rowperfect went into abeyance for the 5 years prior to his death. He sold it to the Australian agent, Mark Campbell. Mark was developing a new machine and then decided not to resupply the old machine. And the RP3, which is we now sell, was the end game of that development cycle. And then the business got sold again to a man called Jan Lammers back in the Netherlands. So there were kind of times where we were called Rowperfect and we didn't have a rowing machine called Rowperfect to sell. And so it became really clear that our company needed to transition. So the rowing machine is now called RP3. And we needed other product to sell because we didn't actually have physical things that we could sell. And so that's when the idea of producing short chapter length ebooks started. And we answered the questions that people asked. And people were this time asking questions in our Facebook page. And, you know, you meet people and, or they email you and they say, hey, you know, I have this question. How do you paint oars? How do you warm up for rowing? And so initially I would write a blog post to answer the question. And sometimes it was 2 or 3. So there's like a whole series of blog posts about how to deal with blisters and other skin injuries like slide track bites on the back of your calves. And they started as a series of blog posts. And then I then would bundle them all together and make an ebook. So one of our most popular ebooks is called How to Deal with Rowing Blisters. And that's still actually about one of the most popular pages on our website. Every new cohort of athletes at some point will search for you know, rowing blister cure or some variant of that, and they find our website. So that was how it began. And recognizing that if one person has asked the question, there's probably a load more people who have thought the same thing but haven't bothered to ask it. So creating an online resource where you can answer questions becomes really important. And that's now morphed where if you look me up on Quora.com, the question and answer website, I'm one of the top people to answer rowing questions. And you know that I have emailed you and asked you to help me answer some questions. I think the first one was someone asked about high intensity interval training for rowing. And I was like, I know nothing about this, but hey, I think I know somebody who probably does know the answer. And that's how it's developed. Yeah,
it's remarkable to hear just sort of the natural evolution of the business over, you know, really kind of the last 20 years or so. You know, initially starting out with the website and the product, and then really continuing to focus on educational resources and knowledge and coaching. So that's very, very cool. And yes, I do know, I'm very aware that you're quite active on Quora. So yeah, I gotta do a better job and get on there. I have some emails that like people have requested for me to answer questions for, so I need to play catch up on those. But that is a great platform as well to help, again, answer those questions, to drive traffic back to the website and continue to kind of enhance the ability to be a resource within the rowing community. So it's a great job.
I think the big place is that there are lots of formal training and education courses, usually run by rowing federations, and they're great. But there's a kind of gap between the formal training course and a book, and that's the space where Rowperfect hangs out. It's the kind of, you and I are on the bank of a river or a lake, and I turn to you and I go, hey, Joe, have you ever seen this situation? You know, what did you do? And that's the sort of question that we think we're quite good at answering.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's a great point. You hit the nail on the head there, that gap between sort of what is in a classic textbook, you know, on training or physiology or a program, and what you would be getting from a coach or seminar type of thing, and being able to kind of fill those in and help people along their own individual path get to where they're trying to go.
Yeah, I like to feel that people can go and try something for themselves. So I put a blog post up last week about an outing that we had done and the actual technical things we had worked on in the outing, and how I'd started with one point and then built another small change on top of that, and then a third one on top of that, and how we used this speed coach to measure the change and to see whether we were being effective. And I kind of hope that people read that and think, I could print that off. You know, I could go try that with my crew, whether you're in the crew or coaching the crew or coxing the crew.
Right. Yeah, I saw that post. That was a very good one. And one of the things I really enjoyed about that post in particular was just sort of the shift of, you know, you were sort of asking a question and getting people to kind of look at the rowing stroke and how we look at information and data in a different way than we normally do. I
think data and understanding the numbers that can easily be got for rowing, I think that this is a massive, massive new area for the vast majority of participants in the sport. Most of us were brought up on stroke rate and time, fundamentally.
Mm-hmm.
The easy availability of GPS has really changed things. And so, in fact, it's it's going to be a very big ongoing theme. In fact, I made a new category on the blog, rowing data, as a category for blog posts, because I think that this is a big, big education. Yes, of course, it can be very, very specialist, but also I think at a generalist level, more of us needs to understand the numbers and to get used to tracking some of them, not all the time, but understanding what is your normal boat speed in meters per second or a 500-meter split. You know, what changes in your technique when you move into a headwind? Things like that, and how does that affect your speed? And what can you do to change the slowing down of going into a headwind technically in order to try and maintain your average boat speed? And I think these are things that a lot of folks haven't even begun to think about.
Yeah, it's certainly a very different way of kind of approaching your training sessions and coaching too, as well as being a rower, an athlete, and looking at that data and how it can influence kind of what you need to do from a progression standpoint, like things you need to address technically, as well as, again, what you need to work on in the individual sessions and getting that feedback.
Yeah. One of the things that I noticed for a while when I was at Tideway Scullers School, I coached our young juniors. So these are young people aged 10 to 14. So not much endurance, complete beginners, rowing on the tidal Thames, the Tideway, which is a reasonably dangerous, potentially dangerous stretch of river. So lots of challenges. But one of the things that I really noticed is that children, and in fact I now know adults, but at the time I was just focusing on children, children respond really well to small challenges. you know, hey Joe, can you keep your blades off the water in the recovery for 10 strokes consecutively? And then I would have a coxed quad of kids counting out loud every time they succeeded in doing a recovery when their oars didn't touch the water. And, you know, for them, it was a real triumph to get to 6, you know, and then little, having a number, even if it, in this case, it was just counting, it wasn't rowing data as such, but that idea of having a focus which is visible and can be understood by everyone, I think is a really useful coaching tool.
Yeah, absolutely. They're getting instant feedback, and it's a objective that they can potentially hit within that training session. But it's also small enough where, like, you know, if they don't get to 10 strokes with keeping the blade off the water, they can try again within. So again, it's something that they can keep working towards during that training session, and they'll start thinking about, you know, the little kind of nuances and balance in the hands and getting feedback and, you know, having to make little micro adjustments till they get to the point where it's off the water for all 10 strokes and then off the water all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of my other bugbears is using drills and exercises. I think is a really powerful way of isolating part of the stroke and teaching something which might be an exaggeration. It might not be something you do in normal, regular, continuous rowing. But I get very frustrated when people do an exercise once. Normally, I think most crews need to do it at least 3 times during a single outing, with obviously regular rowing in between, to test their skill. And they forget that, yeah, initially do the drill, whatever. Then you need to do it and make it harder for yourself, say by doing it at firm pressure or at a lower rate or a higher rate. And so people think they have acquired this particular skill and nailed it, but they fail to see, first, that it needs to transition into the continuous rowing, and secondly, they need to then do it under pressure and then see if they're still able to maintain that technical change. And so unless it's a fixed crew where you are rowing together very regularly with always the same people, which for masters rowing, this doesn't happen very often. You know, when, yes, you might choose just to always do one exercise once, maybe as part of your warm-up. I think that if you're using exercises as part of your education and skill acquire, you need to repeat them more often than you think.
Yes, absolutely. Getting that repetition in, especially during, you know, early introduction to sport, is so important for the development and picking it up and ingraining those good technical habits. So kind of one of the last questions we have down here is, you know, what are the short and long-term ambitions for Rowperfect? So kind of, I guess, what are you working on right now? What's behind the scenes? And then what do you kind of see on the horizon for the company, maybe later this year or in the next couple of years? Where do things need to go?
Behind the scenes right now, we are working on a giant rowing giveaway contest. So we are in the process of getting in touch with a large number of people who sell product in the rowing world. And so this ranges from people who sell jewelry, who sell handle grips, who sell clothing, who sell other advice programs, and asking them if they want to participate in a giant raffle. Do you call them raffles in the States?
Yeah, yes.
And our goal is to run it in October through the Head of the Charles, through to early, I think the 1st of November is when the prize is going to be drawn. And then we want there to be tens of prizes, like lots and lots of prizes, and try and get a ton of people who are in rowing to participate. And this will serve a couple of purposes. One is people who know Rowperfect then get to know other rowing retailers who obviously want to expand their customer base. There's the opportunity of winning some great stuff. And I think drawing together the global, mostly English-speaking rowing community through a lot of different media, all focused on a sort of common objective I think will be a lot of fun. So that's something that you can expect to see coming up quite soon. As a result of that, we've been in discussion with a large number of rowing, I call them rowing retailers, but people who sell rowing product. And although many people are familiar, for example, with the boat builders and the clothing manufacturers and a few others, there are actually a huge number of companies who are set up by inspired individuals who have maybe one product or two products. So you may, for example, know Johannes Rudolph. Well, you wouldn't know him, but you probably know an app called Rowing in Motion, or RIM. It's a very popular app which you can take your phone in the boat. Now, RIM also sells a smartphone mount, which you can then mount your smartphone in your rowing boat. And so that's a kind of product that he makes and sells, and we can help him reach a bigger audience through Rowperfect, because Rowperfect has, I have calculated, I think that we're probably the 4th biggest rowing website in the world after World Rowing and Row2K. You know, they're pretty big.
Yeah.
And, you know, the Concept 2 website is huge because, of course, there's a huge gym membership of people who get involved there as well. But we're the sort of website where people have a discussion. You don't really have a discussion if you go to Row2K. You go there to get the rowing news. Similarly, World Rowing, it serves a slightly different purpose, and we're not in competition with that. But what we would love is to be the place where more people choose to come to get these questions answered. And so by having people like Johannes participate in the raffle, we hope that his audience will get to know about us and our audience will get to know about him. And that it's kind of overlocking circles, the Venn diagram of people who are interested in rowing stuff. Well, you may say, I don't want a smartphone mount for my boat. That's fine. But then there will be other companies that you go, hey, that's neat. I didn't know about that, or that was interesting, or maybe I'll buy a shirt from those people, or a piece of jewelry for myself or my girlfriend, or a gift for my coach. You know, so there's so many different things out there. And so I think we have a business to business part of Rowperfect, which is that we help smaller retailers who are coming new to the market with new product. We help them reach a bigger audience than they could do on their own. And so there is a whole parallel side of Rowperfect where we actually help other companies promote their products. And we take a totally neutral stance. I have no qualms with promoting products that compete with ones that we sell ourselves. I feel that the customer is smart enough to figure it out for themselves. They will make their own minds up as to whether this rowing machine or this rowing machine is right for them. And I think this transparency is somewhat unusual in the rowing world. It's quite normal in other parts of the business world. And so that is a platform that you will see change and develop. And in fact, we have already started the beginnings of that right now, with Marlene Royal doing the Faster Masters program. We also this past week just relaunched 4 of Mike Davenport's rigging booklets, and about buying equipment and maintaining rowing equipment. Now, these are books that he wrote a while ago, but he is relaunching his website, which is called maxrigging.com. And as a result, he has renewed a lot of his existing material, and he's working on new stuff as well. And he does choose to sell his products through us, but we can help him reach a bigger audience, because Max Rigging has been very quiet for, I think, around 3 years. He's been focused on other things. But now that he wants to ramp it back up again, we can be the publicity engine. And so I'm hoping that we will get to know more and more new rowing retailers who have new, exciting things to offer, and that we then have an opportunity to help them sell their stuff. So that's what's new and behind the scenes.
Very cool. Yeah, it sounds like Rowperfect's well on its way to becoming, you know, one of, if not the biggest hubs in the sport of rowing for coaching, education, and services and products.
What do you think we could do differently? It's a question I ask myself the whole time, and I love to ask people who know us from the outside.
That's an interesting question. Yeah, I think you're doing a great job right now bringing in people that have had tremendous amount of success. Marlene Royal specifically in coaching, Mike Davenport has a tremendous amount of experience and expertise in the rigging. So rowing is such a big sport. The movement is simple but not easy, and kind of picking out sort of these specific areas that have tremendous impact on at the end of the day boat speed, I think is a great direction to head. So you're continuing to do that. You've done that with Will Ruth and on the strength and conditioning side. So I think just continuing to kind of move in that direction, and also keeping an eye, like you said, on data. I think that's only going to continue to be very important, and being able to capture it and then make sense of it in a very simple way that's going to be able to translate into having an effect on the training program and what you're doing. So yeah, I think you're doing a great job.
I love your strength coach roundtable. It was the first time we moved away from me being the podcast host, and you three, and so that's Will Ruth, Joe DeLeo, and Blake Gourlay. And you've done 5 episodes so far, and I believe there are some more planned. And I would love to have more spin-off specialist approaches. And when I say specialist, I don't mean you have to be in a single point of interest in the sports. Just someone with a very different perspective from mine adds a whole layer of interest, and a whole ton of people who don't like listening to me for whatever reason, they then get something new. And there's a wonderful man called Gary Anderson who runs the Cape Fear Rowing Association. I must say, I have no idea what Cape Fear is, but doesn't it sound awesome? Anyway, Gary said the Rowing Chat podcast is like a monthly coach education seminar. He just said, there's always one thing I get from it where I think, I could try that, or, I'd forgotten that, that's great. I must go back and do that again. And so having more voices is actually an ambition of mine. So if anyone's listening and would like to put themselves up for hosting a show, please just get in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fantastic platform. I know Will and Blake and I are due to do another strength coach roundtable. We actually have one scheduled in July, and then I kind of probably put a wrench into that since I was in the process of moving across the country in the United States, several states from the East Coast to the Midwest. So we had to put that on, we had to table that and put it on hold for a little while. So I guess with that, that takes us through the designated topics we have. So is there anything else that you kind of want to touch on before we sign off for this interview?
I would like to touch on an area that I am just beginning to get interested in, and this is general population well-being and healthiness and activity. And I'm becoming, obviously I'm getting older, I'm a masters athlete myself, but I'm becoming aware that rowing clubs are very constrained in their operating model. They will take beginners, some won't take beginners. They will take juniors, some won't take juniors. They will take young people who want to race 2,000 meter races in side-by-side boats and train them. Some of them have a master's program, some don't. And if you don't fit easily into one of those categories, our sport basically excludes you. So if you are a former rower who decides that they would like to come back and do some rowing, but you do not want to train 10 times a week, you can't join in this, what we call the senior squad, because they don't want you, because you won't be as fit as the others, you know, to do that 2K racing. And so I think a really big new challenge that I'm looking at is, what are the other more flexible ways where rowing clubs can grow their membership, grow access to rowing in, I don't want to call it recreational, because actually let's just enjoy the sport. You may or may not choose to race, but you may or may not choose to do a different sort of participation, which could be racing. And so my club runs adult learn to row classes for 6 weeks at a time. And we use big stable, they're actually ocean rowing boats. That it's pretty hard to capsize, but you're on your own and you get to learn the basics quite fast. And then if you want to join the club, you can. But one of the other things we're looking at is stand-up paddle boards, where you can strap a rig to the top of it, which is basically a sliding rigger with a seat. So it fits in quite a compact area. So it'll go onto a reasonably small paddle board. And you could pretty much put that on the top of your car and go anywhere. It's not a boat, it's a dual purpose vehicle, craft, whatever. Is there a space for people who want to not row in a fine boat, but still come out and join the group and, you know, paddle around our little lake in the mornings? And then another thing that I have recently become aware of, a lot of other sports have summertime programs, which they call twilight. So there's twilight golf, and you can do twilight hockey and netball and soccer and all sorts of other sports. And I have asked our committee if they would consider doing twilight rowing. And the deal is, if you can already row, you can come and join in. You know, we sign you up as a member, so you're in the insurance cover of the club. And then maybe we'll just do Wednesday night races and a few beers afterwards and, you know, some hot dogs. But it's a way of expanding participation to suit modern busy lives. For maybe you're a young person with a young family, and you know you can't commit to turning up regularly, but you still would like to get out on the water. And so I think that there is a huge opportunity for us to widen the constituency of people who have some familiarity with the sport, and also to enable rowing clubs, some of whom I know struggle financially, to raise money to fund whatever they want to fund, you know, through a dispersed membership of more occasional users. So that's an idea that I have festering in the back of my mind. I think the big challenge is how to get this message out to clubs, and then have clubs consider it as part of, you know, their ongoing programs. And of course, the poster child for this is the CRI club in Boston, Massachusetts, Community Rowing Inc., who have so many different programs and training groups and very structured learning environments, which is really commendable. But for example, they have an obese kids class, which is probably not called that, but these are people who are referred by their medical doctor, but who come to rowing because, unlike other sports, you never fall behind because you can't run. Everybody's in the boat goes at the same speed for everyone. And there's this wonderful leveling platform that enables everyone to participate and to not be judgmental about the contribution of the other guys and girls in the boat. And apparently it's been very, very successful. There was also a blog post I wrote recently about a club in the UK called Royal Chester Rowing Club that has an outreach program into local schools based on, they bring a rowing machine or like 10 rowing machines into a school, run a class with the local school sports teachers, and then have train up the teachers to take the class themselves without the involvement of the club. But they then have a ready-made audience of young people who might want to try water rowing as well. And they say that they feel the biggest hurdle to the growth in membership and access is the fact that on-water rowers look at rowing machine rowers as second-class citizens. They think that we have an attitude problem about gym rowers. And so I think that's an interesting point, and that maybe people like you and I, who have come up through the water side of the sport, we should challenge this. and look at ways where you can facilitate someone who's a gym rower to come sit on a stand-up paddleboard with a rigger on top of it, have a good experience, feel like they achieved something, even though you and I know it's not fine boat rowing, but it is rowing and it is out on the water, and did they enjoy it? So there's a big challenge for the future.
Yeah, it's very interesting to hear you speak on that. Because one of the things, that space that you're talking about, so it's not quite learn to row, but it's not, you know, more seasoned, experienced members in a club who are really going to be competitive and race quite a bit. And to me, that just sounds like individuals, again, focus more on health first and foremost. And as a result of that, they're going to be fit. But that's just GPP, general physical preparedness. So something like that to me would look like, you know, a few days a week, and you could be doing different activities where maybe they're doing a few rowing sessions, whether on water or on the erg, they're running, they're doing strength work. You know, maybe they're doing stand-up paddle boarding or canoe, kayak. Yeah, I think, you know, part of that too is just sort of a shift in an acceptance as well in philosophy. You know, the kind of no pain, no gain mentality. You know, exercise is supposed to be done to help enhance your health, not to take it away. So, you know, you don't always have to feel like you're getting yourself beat up at the end of a training session. It should have a very sort of joyful, rejuvenating effect, which doesn't mean that there aren't hard sessions and you're not working hard, but by and large, it has to be something that you can do that's sustainable for the rest of your life. And if you're doing intensity all the time, that will break you down. So taking that kind of GPP model, which you do a lot in strength and conditioning, and doing the same thing on the endurance side, that could be quite successful.
I also noticed that when people who've never rowed before get out onto a lake or a river and they're out there on the water, the vast majority of them absolutely love being outside on a water course. Mm-hmm. There's something about water that most people just love. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are, as organisms, we are like about 2/3 water. I mean, that's what we're made of. So I don't know if it's that sort of innate, you know, that's what we're composed of, or something else, but it's the environment too. You're reconnecting with nature. You're not in a physical indoor space where you're looking at a monitor or a wall. You know, you're seeing trees and hearing wildlife. So the input from all of the different senses, the 5 senses, is completely different. Yeah. You know, so it's much greater stimulus, I think, in that regard. It's much richer environment.
We started a Masters Rowing Facebook group recently called Masters Rowing International. And one of the things that when someone is new to the group, we encourage them to introduce themselves to the group and to tell everyone where they row. And people have started putting up these awesome pictures of the places they row. And someone put one up last week from, I think it's Cleveland, Ohio, and they are rowing past one of the biggest boats, like commercial ships, in this port that I think I have ever seen, and their description explaining the rules of the road and where they can't overtake these boats, but they seem to be, you know, happily sharing a waterway. And it was just a brilliant eye-opener to you know, all the different places around the world. And then people have started trading stories and going, someone just messaged me and said, I'm in Singapore, would anyone like to come row with me? And I know when she puts that up on the group, there'll be people who'll go, oh, I have a business trip planned to Singapore, or I'm coming on holiday, or, you know, and people have definitely connected through the group and like made arrangements to visit each other or to go to the same regatta and to meet up. So I kind of feel that there's a whole friendship building around, okay, in this case it's masters rowers, but don't mind if people aren't masters who want to join in.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's, It's unbelievable how quickly that group has grown. I think it's not even, I think, 6 months old, and it's a couple thousand members. So that's incredible to see. It's very cool. So that's just a great thing. And the information and discussion taking place on there is great. So that's only going to kind of hopefully, help everybody out on their own respective journeys.
Yeah, and for me, it's an awesome source of answers to questions. So there was a great discussion recently, someone else started, not me, about how do clubs allocate boats and boat booking software. So I have a blog post planned, and a guy came into the conversation. He said, I've written something and it's in beta and I'm looking for people to trial it. And that's a really good example of a rowing retailer, something new that, we can help him find an audience of people who will beta test his software for him.
Right. Yeah. Especially, that'd be good. Do a little beta testing. Very nice. Yeah. It's perfect. That's right there. You got your niche, finding the people. Great way to connect. Excellent. Yeah. So you've got plenty that you're, that's, on the stove, letting it simmer.
It's such fun.
Yes, it is. It is incredibly good fun. Awesome. Well, is there anything else that I don't want to forget anything? I think we've covered a ton here.
You've been amazing, and I want to personally thank everybody who listens, who watches, who reads the Rowperfect stuff, who buys stuff from us. It's great if you buy stuff. But also, I'd like a shout out to say, if you can take the time to leave us a review in iTunes, would really appreciate it, and share the link to the RowingChat page to other friends who also might enjoy listening in.
Absolutely. And I'll make sure I share that later too as well. Very good. Well, Rebecca, this has been a blast. I'm glad you kind of let me take over emceeing, so to speak, a little bit and turn the tables and interview you. So thank you.
It's been brilliant fun. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye now.
Bye.